another week of college football, and man, I'm excited. And why? Because we are in week 14, something that I wasn't sure we were going to reach, but here we are. It is another week, and I want to break down some of the games. First one that I'm going to be looking at is Texas A&M visits at Auburn. The line for this game is A&M minus 6-point favorite. The over-under for this game is 48. This line did open at 6.5. It has come down some, and the total for this game was at 49.5. That has also come down some. I am not a believer in Bo Nix, but I'm also not a believer in the A&M Aggies. Both teams are pretty similar in terms of total offense, passing yards, yards per attempt, though A&M does have the edge in yards per play. Defensively, the Aggies' rush defense is absolutely, totally skewed. The stats say that they are 8th best, but the best offensive rush offense that they have faced was Alabama, who is ranked 49th in the country. Every other team that they have faced is 85 or worse. But something that is of note is that Auburn's run game is on the back of Tank Bigsby. His status for this game right now is questionable. Whether he's going to play or not is unknown. He was pulled from the Bama game last week. He is their run game. DJ Williams, their second best running back, he is also questionable for this game after getting injured also again in the game against Alabama. He has yet to practice this week, so Auburn could potentially be down two of their best running backs. Now you're going to put it in the hands of Bo Nix. Both are top 5 in converting on third downs, but the difference here is that Aggies are 28th in limiting third down conversions, allowing just 35%. Auburn is 129th, the second worst in the country. A&M is also top 20 in opponent red zone scoring attempts, so they are definitely making the stops. Auburn, they are a respectable top 50, which also leads me to look at the under in this game, but you've already lost some point value on this. I don't like betting a worse number when I want all the points that I can grab. Neither will give the ball away, neither take the ball away, so if it's going to come down to who has the ball longest, who is able to make the stops, then I'm going to be looking at the Aggies with the better pass rush, the better offensive line, the best third down defense, and who will have running backs intact, unlike Auburn. Next, I want to move over to Oklahoma State, who is a minus 1-point favorite at TCU. This line did open as a 3-point spread, but the heart of this Oklahoma State offense is Chuba Hubbard. He had combined 14 carries in his last 2 games. He did miss the game against Texas Tech. Oklahoma still managed to win that 50-44, but how did they win if they didn't have their star running back? Desmond Jackson came in and had 235 rushing yards of his own and 3 rushing touchdowns. So that means that they don't need Chuba Hubbard, right? Texas Tech is bottom 20 in opponent rushing yards per game and opponent yards per rush, and essentially they have no pass rush. Texas Tech is a team that is essentially ranked bottom in every defensive metric, as you can tell by the score. TCU absolutely is not that. TCU is top 40 in limiting opponent rushing yards, only giving up 134 rushing yards per game and just 3.9 yards per rush. They are also top 40 in applying quarterback pressure. They have produced 22 sacks and now get to feast on a weakened offensive line from Oklahoma State. In Oklahoma State's 2 losses, Spencer Sanders was sacked for a combined 8 times. So no, I am not convinced that this offense has found a new Chuba replacement. As of right now, it does look like he's not a go, as Coach Gundy did say that Desmond Jackson was still named as the starter for this week. But honestly, what incentive does Chuba Hubbard have to play at this point? If he is injured and looking to enter the NFL draft, he probably wants to ease off and prepare for that instead. It's that time of the year where teams can play spoiler. TCU, I think, can definitely be that for Oklahoma State. TCU has an offense of their own to contend. They average 200 rushing yards per game, 5 yards per rush. TCU's best defense is actually against the run. So I'll take the home team that can play spoiler with a pass rush, a solid offense, and the better defense to upset an Oklahoma State team and keep them from seeing the title game. But here's the caveat. The value is lost. TCU is now +1 when you could have had +3. Moneyline was +120 and it is now -105. Sure, I do think that TCU definitely can keep this within the number. They can win this game outright, but I personally don't want to put my money on a worse number at -105 when I know just even yesterday I could have had +120. So for me, purely because of the value is lost, it is going to be a pass. Next, I want to look at Memphis visiting at Tulane, who is a 2-point home favorite. The total for this game is 63, up from the initial 62.5. First, I want to examine the Memphis passing offense versus the Tulane passing defense. Memphis is 9th in the country for passing yards per game, averaging 333 yards, and they are 29th in yards per pass, averaging 8.3. Brady White, he is having a pretty good season, 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. The one problem area that this Memphis team does have is 15 sacks. And now they are facing a Tulane team who has a combined 38 sacks. White was sacked 6 times against Cincinnati alone. Tulane, though, however, if you look at their games, that defense is not there. It's pretty lackluster. Versus Houston, they allowed 319 passing yards, 9.7 yards per pass, 49 points. SMU, they allowed 439 yards, 11.6 yards per pass, 37 points. Tulane versus UCF, they allowed 422 yards, 10.6 yards per pass, 51 points. You can kind of see where I'm going with this. Tulane versus Tulsa, who isn't that great of a passing team, even allowed them 343 passing yards, 7.1 yards per pass, and 30 points. Tulane has allowed all 4 of these teams to pass above their average in both passing yards and yards per pass. So this is definitely a spot that I think we could see Memphis look like Memphis once again. But now let's look at Tulane's rushing offense versus Memphis's rushing defense. Tulane is 18th in rushing yards per game, averaging 224 yards, and they are 22nd, averaging 5.2 yards per rush. Their running back core has a combined 27 total touchdowns, 2,200 rushing yards. Memphis versus UCF, 26th in rushing yards. They allowed 197 yards, 4.2 yards per rush. When they played against Navy, who is 40th in rushing yards, they allowed them 233 rushing yards, 4.5 yards per rush. What is important to note about this game is that the Tigers' leading rusher, Rodriguez Clark, is expected to play after missing last week's game against Navy. That'll really help out this offense. Tulane just lost their offensive coordinator to Southern Miss because he was now hired as their next head coach. So with Clark back, I do think that Memphis can get their passing game back to form. Historically, though, Tulane is pretty good as a home team. They are 3-1 against the spread at home this season. They were a perfect 6-0 against the spread at home last season, but it is senior day. And one fun fact about that is that they are actually 2-4 straight up in their last 6 on senior day. So I'm looking to Memphis here, taking the points and potentially springing some on that money line. Next, I want to look at Stanford visiting to Washington. Washington is an 11.5-point favorite at home. This total for this game is set at 50. This line did open at 10 and the total at 51. Washington is 14th in total defense. They are ranked 5th in passing defense, but you know me, when a number looks really good, I want to check to see if their opponents merit that type of ranking. They have played in just 3 games, but in passing yards, their opponents are ranked 87th, 63, and 107, so yes, skewed just a bit. But let me tell you why I still believe that this is a really solid defense. Against Oregon State, they completely shut them out in the second half. The Beavers had 252 total yards in that game, 107 in the second half, and 0 points. Against Arizona, the Wildcats were shut out for 3 full quarters. All 27 points did come in the fourth quarter when they were down 37-0. So this is a defense that maybe got comfortable there in the end. Arizona had 331 total yards in the game, 301 of which did come in that fourth quarter. Offensively, they are 34th in rushing yards per game, averaging 204.8 yards per rush. Stanford defense, they allowed 269 rushing yards to Oregon and 6.7 yards per rush, and they allowed Cal 241 rushing yards and 6.9 yards per rush. So I do think that Washington's ground game can do some damage here. Looking at the Stanford quarterback, Davis Mills, he's pretty okay, 62% completion, but just 6 yards per pass and 2 touchdowns. So I don't think this offense is much of a threat, and they don't really have a run game to assist. So I can see Washington shutting down this one-dimensional offense. And now for the marquee game of the weekend, a game that we didn't know we were going to have, and yet here we are, fortunate to see BYU as a minus 10-point favorite at Coastal Carolina. The total for this game is 61, and here I am. I'm going to go off on my rant. Be ready. No, I don't think that BYU is a top 10 team. Even if they do beat Coastal Carolina, they're still not a top 10 team. Why? Because Coastal Carolina is ranked worse than they are. Beat a top 10 team, then you can have a top 10 ranking. But they demolished Navy. Navy admitted that they didn't have contact practice. But they beat Houston. Houston had 440 yards in that game, 9.4 yards per pass. What killed them was a slew of penalties. Cincinnati held Houston to 280 yards, 5.6 yards per pass, and 10 points. Now that is a defense. But they beat Boise. Broncos were missing their starting quarterback and faced a third-string quarterback because the second-string quarterback got injured. They do not have one quality win under their belt. But now let's look at this game. Let's look first at the passing offenses. BYU is 7th in passing yards per game, averaging 340 yards, 11 yards per pass. But they have faced one defense in the top 50, and that's Western Kentucky. They threw in that game 244 yards and 6.6 yards per pass. But Western Kentucky is also 123rd in total offense, so no, you cannot have a quality defense when you have a non-existent offense. Just ask the Chicago Bears. Coastal Carolina is 77th in passing yards, but they are an efficient 9.1 yards per pass, good for 14th best in the country. Grayson McCall definitely has the deep ball ability, as we have seen multiple times this season. Looking at the passing defenses, the stats do say that Coastal Carolina is top 20 in passing defense, but they have faced one passing team in the top 50, and that's Arkansas State. They gave up 350 passing yards, 7.9 yards per pass. The stats also say that BYU is 25th in passing defense. They have faced Troy, a one-dimensional team that is 86th in total offense. Houston, which I mentioned earlier, just how poor of a defense they were to Houston. Looking at the rushing offense, Coastal Carolina's strength is in that run game. They're ranked 17th in yards, averaging 225 rushing yards per game, and they are 29th in efficiency, averaging 5.1 yards per rush. BYU is 36th, averaging 195 yards, and 28th, averaging 5.2 yards per rush. So now we're looking at two really good run offenses. I want to look at the stats for the rushing defense. All of BYU's opponents rank in the bottom third of rushing offense with the exception of one. They did play against UTSA, who is ranked 25th. In that game, they averaged 214 rushing yards per game and 5.3 yards per rush. BYU limited them to 72 yards and 2.6 yards per rush. For what it's worth, that was under a different quarterback, so potentially there's a different scheme in that game. Coastal Carolina stats, I think, do hold a little bit more weight in this area because they have faced four high-quality rushing offenses, all in the top 50. 3 are actually in the top 22. They did face Louisiana Lafayette, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, and Appalachian State. Coastal Carolina allowed 7.9 yards per rush to Louisiana, but they still managed to get a 30-27 win. They held the other three teams to 3.2 yards, 2.7 yards, and 4.4 yards per rush. The matchup in this game that I absolutely cannot wait to see is the Coastal Carolina pass rush versus this BYU offensive line. Zach's only been sacked 7 times this season, but he has faced only one top three-quarter pass rush in Houston. The Chanticleers defense has 33 sacks already, 11 interceptions, and 12 forced fumbles. They are really good at forcing turnovers. Coastal Carolina is 15th in converting on third down, and BYU is 73rd. Coastal Carolina is 7th in limiting third down conversions. What I do like in this game is Coastal Carolina plus 10. I do like the over because these stats are skewed in either direction. You have two really good offenses with completely misleading stats. Coastal Carolina does have a pass rush that I think can disrupt in this game. They are top 20 in forcing turnovers. I am even going to sprinkle some plus 280 of that money line and give me Coastal Carolina and the Chanticleers.